Michael Jordan hears a player saying no one shows up for me, then fills the stands himself. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. It was a Wednesday night, a typical high school basketball game under dimmed lights and the smell of popcorn and sweat. The gym was nearly empty, save for a handful of parents and a few friends who had wandered in. In the center of the court, the young player dribbled, his face intense with concentration. He was good, really good. A natural, some would say. But tonight, just like every other night, he felt the sting of being overlooked. In the small-town gym, the sound of his sneakers on the hardwood echoed, only to be drowned out by the silence from the stands. His teammates tried to make up for the lack of energy, cheering each other on, but it wasn't enough to mask the loneliness. He had been playing basketball for years, but this wasn't the first time he'd found himself in a nearly empty gym. The absence of a cheering crowd, the lack of recognition, was something he was all too familiar with. Tonight was no different. He was giving it everything, every jump shot, every assist, every drive to the basket. His performance was solid, yet the response was still the same, nothing. He played like a star, but felt like a ghost, unnoticed and unappreciated by the world around him. It didn't matter how hard he worked, how much time he spent perfecting his craft, or how much potential he had. No one was watching. The stands were half-filled, at best, and most of the attention was elsewhere, on other teams, on players with bigger names, bigger stats. The young player watched his shot bounce off the rim for what seemed like the 100th time that season. His frustration was palpable, but he hid it behind a steely determination. He was used to playing alone in the spotlight. His parents had always told him to keep going, keep pushing, keep dreaming. They were supportive, but there was only so much they could do. And here, on the court, under the glaring lights and the quiet gym, it felt like no one else cared. During a timeout, as his teammates huddled together, he stood off to the side, wiping his face with a towel, his thoughts swirling. His coach gave a speech, his voice eager and hopeful, trying to keep morale high despite the obvious lack of energy. But for the young player, the words didn't matter. He was tired. Tired of fighting to be seen, tired of showing up every night only to feel like an afterthought. He overheard a conversation between a couple of his teammates, talking about their plans for the weekend, their social lives, and their interests outside of basketball. They had friends in high places, in other schools, places where the spotlight was always on them, where their names were being heard. The young player's heart sank a little. He didn't have those connections. He didn't have people clamoring for his attention. It was just him, his sneakers, and an empty gym. "You ever feel like no one shows up for you?" he muttered to himself, the words leaving his mouth before he could stop them. It wasn't a question for anyone in particular, it was just a statement, a raw, honest thought that had been lingering for a while. He was tired of being the invisible player, the one who never seemed to catch a break. After the game ended, the team celebrated their narrow win, but the young player just wanted to leave. He wasn't in the mood to celebrate. He wasn't in the mood to fake a smile or nod politely to people who hadn't even watched the game. He grabbed his bag, tossed it over his shoulder, and headed for the exit, the familiar sting of disappointment following him out of the gym. As he walked toward his car, the parking lot was mostly empty, with only a few cars left. He got into his car, turned the ignition, and drove home. He could feel the loneliness creeping in again. The days were often filled with practice, with workouts, with games. But the nights were quiet. And that was when it hurt the most. His phone buzzed, a text message from a friend reminding him to keep pushing, to not let the quiet gym and the lack of recognition get to him. But it didn't help. He had heard it all before. Encouraging words meant nothing when you felt invisible. The next day, he sat in class, his mind drifting back to the game. His teammates were talking about their upcoming plans. One was going to a big party, another was getting ready for a weekend tournament. Everyone seemed to have something going on, something that mattered. The young player didn't feel like he had anything. Basketball was his escape, his chance to prove himself, but without the support, without the acknowledgement, it felt hollow. As the bell rang and students filed out of class, he caught sight of a notice on the bulletin board, College Recruitment Fair. His heart skipped a beat, but then the familiar doubt settled in. Who would come to see him? Why would anyone take a chance on someone from a small school in the middle of nowhere? His potential seemed locked in the gym, never to be noticed by those who could help him take the next step. His thoughts were interrupted when his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from his coach. Big game next week, kid. Get your head in the game. This is your chance. The young player stared at the screen, the words almost mocking him. It wasn't that he didn't want to play well. He wanted to be great, to be recognized. But how could he when no one was watching? How could he when the stands were empty, when the gym was silent? He sat back in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment. The weight of the question hit him hard. Was he meant to be great? Did he have what it took to make it? Or was he just another player who would fade into the background, remembered by a handful of people but ultimately forgotten by the world? His dream of playing on bigger courts, in front of larger crowds, felt far away. Later that day, as he walked to the gym for another practice, he overheard a conversation that would change the course of his future. It was a familiar voice, a voice he never thought he'd hear in this context, but there it was. Michael Jordan. The legend himself. He was there, speaking to his coach, offering advice and guidance on how to improve the school's basketball program. The young player's heart raced. Was he really hearing this right? Was Jordan really in the gym? Little did the young player know, this was the beginning of a story that would shift the trajectory of his life. Michael Jordan had heard the quiet cry of the young player's struggle and, as always, Jordan was about to show that, even in the most unlikely of places, greatness could be found, and greatness, no matter how small, deserved to be seen. The week following the encounter in the gym was a blur for the young player. The thoughts of Michael Jordan's unexpected presence in his gym kept swirling in his mind, but they weren't the only things on his mind. His heart raced every time he thought back to the conversation he overheard, the one where Jordan spoke to the coach, offering his advice on how to improve the team. He had always admired Jordan from afar, watched the highlights, and followed his career. But to hear his voice in person, in the same gym where he played every game, it felt surreal. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to wonder if the legend had noticed him, if his struggles had somehow caught the attention of someone who had changed the game forever. Despite the intensity of the moment, life went on. His team continued to practice and play, each game a reminder of his isolation on the court. His performances, though solid, continued to be overlooked, and the stands remained sparsely filled. The stark contrast between the dream he'd built for himself and the reality of his situation never seemed more apparent. The thought that someone like Michael Jordan could walk into his gym, someone who had experienced unimaginable success, made his current reality even harder to bear. He wondered if his path, one that had always felt so uncertain, could ever truly lead to something more. But then, the unexpected happened. It started with a murmur among the school's athletes and staff. Michael Jordan was going to attend the next game. The young player couldn't believe his ears. He asked his teammates, but they laughed it off, dismissing it as nothing more than a pipe dream. But the buzz persisted, growing louder. Eventually, his coach confirmed the news. Jordan had bought out the entire section of the stands, making sure that the gym would be filled. And Jordan wasn't just attending, he was going to sit in the front row, front and center, to watch the game unfold. The young player's mind raced. Was this really happening? Was Jordan really coming to see him play? The idea felt impossible. For years, the gym had been quiet, the empty stand staring back at him. Yet here was a chance to have the greatest basketball player of all time, someone he had idolized for years, sitting mere feet away from the court, watching his every move. The weight of the moment was overwhelming. He couldn't help but feel that this was his one shot to prove that he was more than just a player in a small, unnoticed town. Jordan's presence represented the world, his dream, his goal, his inspiration. The days leading up to the game felt like they were dragging on forever. The young player spent every minute in practice perfecting his game. His coach could see the newfound fire in his eyes, the sense of urgency, the understanding that the stakes had never been higher. It was no longer just about the win. It was about showing Jordan, and everyone else, that he belonged. His teammates, too, could sense the change in the air. They rallied behind him, offering their support and encouragement, knowing that this was a moment they'd all remember. The night of the game, the gym was more packed than it had ever been. People from all over town came to see the legendary Michael Jordan watch the game. There were fans from neighboring schools, basketball enthusiasts, and local news reporters. The energy in the building was unlike anything the young player had ever felt. The gym was buzzing with excitement, and for the first time, the young player felt like he was playing in front of a crowd that was truly invested in him. The usual silence, the usual emptiness, was replaced by a palpable energy that fueled every dribble, every pass, every shot. The moment Jordan walked into the gym, there was a collective gasp. The players froze for a split second as the crowd erupted in applause. Jordan was there, sitting front and center, as promised, his presence commanding the entire room. The young player couldn't believe it. Michael Jordan, the man who had inspired him to pick up a basketball in the first place, was now watching him play. This was it, the moment that could change everything. The first half of the game was a blur of adrenaline. The young player played with a confidence he had never felt before. Every shot seemed to find its mark, every pass seemed to land perfectly, and his defense was tighter than ever. But what made the game even more surreal was the feeling of Jordan's eyes on him. He could almost hear the whispers from the stands, the murmurs of excitement as Jordan clapped after a particularly good play. But it wasn't just the game that mattered now. It was the weight of the moment, knowing that someone who had been the pinnacle of the game was now watching him, not just as a fan, but as someone who had seen greatness firsthand. As the game went on, the young player found himself sinking into the rhythm. He wasn't thinking about Jordan, about the crowd, or about the pressure. He was thinking about the game, about the shots, the moves, and the plays. And with each passing minute, his belief in himself grew stronger. This was his moment to show what he could do, to prove that he was more than just a name in a small-town gym. He was a player worthy of attention, worthy of recognition. But the real test came in the final seconds of the game. The score was tied, and the ball found its way into the young player's hands. This was it, the game-winning shot. The entire gym fell silent as he dribbled, eyes focused on the hoop. The crowd, which had been loud and rowdy throughout the game, seemed to hold its collective breath. The young player's palms were sweaty, his heartbeat thumping in his chest. But then, he heard it, the sound of a familiar voice, cutting through the silence. It wasn't the fans or the players. It was Jordan, clapping softly, offering silent encouragement from the front row. In that moment, the young player realized that it wasn't about the shot itself. It was about the belief that had been instilled in him. Jordan had shown up, not just physically, but with the unspoken message that this player mattered, that he was seen, that he had the potential to be great. The young player didn't hesitate. With all the confidence he had built up, he took the shot. The ball sailed through the air in slow motion, the gym silent, the world holding its breath. Swish! The crowd erupted into cheers as the young player's shot won the game. His teammates rushed the court, lifting him up in celebration, but it wasn't just the victory that made this moment so special. It was the sense that he had earned it. The empty gym had been replaced by a sea of faces, and now, he was the one who had captured their attention. He was no longer alone. He had arrived, and Michael Jordan had been the one to give him the chance. As the young player caught his breath, looking up to the front row, he saw Jordan standing, clapping, smiling. Jordan had believed in him. And that belief had changed everything. Jordan approached him after the game, his face full of warmth and encouragement. "You've got something special," he said. "Keep working, keep believing. I'm proud of you." The young player could hardly believe what he was hearing. Michael Jordan, the greatest of all time, was speaking to him, telling him that he had what it took to succeed. The moment felt surreal, but it was real. It was a new beginning for the young player, one that was filled with endless possibilities. As the gym emptied out, the young player sat on the court, soaking in the moment. He had come so far, and for the first time, he felt seen. Michael Jordan had shown up, not just for a game, but to remind him that talent could break through even the smallest, most forgotten gems. His dream, long buried beneath the weight of self-doubt, had been rekindled. And now, his journey had only just begun. The game that night had changed everything for the young player. The crowd, the energy, the overwhelming presence of Michael Jordan in the front row, these elements had combined to create a moment that would forever be etched in his mind. But even more than that, the confidence that had surged through him during the final seconds of the game, when he had sunk the game-winning shot, was something he hadn't anticipated. He had always believed in himself, but now, he could feel the tangible weight of validation. It was a moment that turned from disbelief to reality. He was no longer just a player in an empty gym, he was someone who had been seen. The next day, word of his performance spread quickly. The small-town community buzzed with excitement. What had once been a quiet, unnoticed game had now captured the attention of local media, sports blogs, and even scouts from nearby colleges. The young player, who had felt invisible his entire life, was suddenly thrust into the spotlight. His phone rang constantly, his inbox filled with messages from former teammates, coaches, and well-wishers. But the most surprising message of all came from his coach, who had spoken with some of the scouts who had attended the game. They were interested. They wanted to see him play again. That was the moment when it hit him, the moment when he realized that this wasn't just a one-off. His dreams were no longer out of reach. The game was his opportunity to showcase everything he had worked for, and the realization that someone else, especially Michael Jordan, had seen it made him understand that his future wasn't as uncertain as he had once thought. The weeks following the game were a whirlwind. The young player continued to practice harder than ever, with a renewed sense of purpose. His team's support for him had grown, too. They had witnessed firsthand what it felt like to play in front of a crowd that was truly invested in their success. His teammates, once caught up in their own lives, began to rally behind him. Their encouragement was different now. It was sincere, understanding that this moment wasn't just about a single player's success. It was about the team coming together to capitalize on the opportunity that had been presented. The local media continued to cover his story. The high school athlete, who had been overlooked for so long, was now a sensation in the area. Interviews followed, articles were written, and his name was mentioned alongside other rising stars. His journey was a symbol of the power of belief, of how one gesture could ignite the fire of an entire community. As the young player's newfound recognition began to grow, he was confronted with a mixture of emotions. There was pride, yes, but also a sense of responsibility. He had always dreamed of playing on bigger stages, but now, that dream was becoming a reality. The pressure to perform at a higher level weighed on him. He wasn't just representing himself anymore, he was representing everyone who had ever felt unseen. He had to prove that he wasn't just a flash in the pan, a one-hit wonder. This was the beginning of his story, not the end. One of the first steps was the upcoming recruitment event at a larger tournament. College scouts were coming to see him play, some of whom had been watching him ever since that unforgettable night. As the day of the tournament arrived, the weight of it all felt surreal. The gym was packed, the stands full of people, friends, family, and college scouts. The pressure to live up to the hype was intense, but he had learned a crucial lesson from Jordan's gesture. It wasn't about the size of the crowd or the expectations others had placed on him. It was about playing the game he loved and proving, first and foremost, to himself that he was worthy of the opportunity. That night, under the bright lights of a much bigger arena, he played with a confidence he had never known before. He had been playing basketball his whole life, but now, every movement felt deliberate, intentional. He wasn't just running the plays or following his coach's instructions, he was in control, reading the game, anticipating his opponent's moves. Every step he took, every shot he made, was with the understanding that his future was unfolding right before his eyes. The game ended in a victory, but it wasn't just the final score that mattered. It was the sense of belonging, the realization that the dream wasn't out of reach anymore. College scouts approached him after the game, offering their business cards, inviting him for further discussions. The young player was swarmed with attention, but he didn't let it overwhelm him. He had earned this moment, and he knew that this was just the beginning. Weeks later, as the young player stood in front of the recruitment board at his high school, he looked over the offers from several colleges. There was no more uncertainty about his future. He had options, real options. He was no longer the invisible player in an empty gym. He was a recruit, sought after by prestigious programs. The feeling was beyond anything he had imagined. It was overwhelming, but it was also empowering. He had earned his place, and now it was up to him to take the next step. But even as he sat there, going over his options, the image of Michael Jordan remained at the forefront of his mind. He had been the one who had filled the stands that night, the one who had believed in him when no one else did. Jordan's presence had given him the confidence to rise above the doubt, to break through the barrier of anonymity and into the spotlight. The young player could feel the weight of that belief still with him, guiding him as he made his decision. Choosing a college wasn't just about basketball. It was about finding a place where he could continue to grow, a place that would push him to become the player he always believed he could be. It wasn't just about competing against others, it was about competing against himself, against the self-doubt that had plagued him for so long. As he finally signed with a Division I program, the young player looked back on everything that had led him to this point. It wasn't just the practice, the games, or the victories. It was the belief that someone had shown up for him, that someone had taken the time to see his potential. Jordan had filled the stands that night, not just with people, but with opportunity. The impact of that gesture went beyond the game. It wasn't just about the filled gym, it was about the way Jordan had made the young player feel, seen, acknowledged, and, most importantly, worthy of the chance to prove himself. That moment had ignited something within him, and now, he was ready to take on whatever came next. As he walked across the stage to accept his college scholarship, the young player thought about the journey ahead. He was no longer just the kid who played alone in an empty gym. He was part of something bigger, something that had started with a single, powerful gesture. And with that gesture, Michael Jordan had changed everything. The young player's world had changed, but the real challenge was just beginning. The attention from scouts and college programs brought excitement, but with it came a new weight, expectations. The moment he had dreamed of for so long, when he would finally be recognized, was now his reality. Yet, the intensity of it all was something he hadn't fully anticipated. He had always been the underdog, the player in the back row of the gym, fighting for his shot. Now, the spotlight was on him, and the pressure felt overwhelming. His first college practice arrived, and the shift was immediate. It wasn't just about talent anymore, it was about adjusting to a new level of competition. The players around him were faster, stronger, and more experienced. Every mistake felt magnified. The young player tried to fit in, to show that he belonged, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was still an outsider, still the player who had fought for every ounce of recognition. The pressure to live up to the hype began to take its toll, and the confidence he had gained from that night in the gym seemed to fade with every practice. But the key to his transformation wasn't just his raw talent, it was his resilience. The young player remembered the feeling of playing in an empty gym, of hearing Jordan's words echo in his mind, telling him to keep pushing. He remembered the moment when the gym had filled up, when Jordan had shown up for him. And now, in the face of greater challenges, he knew that he couldn't let that moment slip away. He had worked too hard to get here, and he couldn't lose sight of the journey that had brought him this far. It wasn't easy, but slowly, the young player began to find his rhythm. He spent long hours after practice, working on his shots, his footwork, and his mental game. He watched footage of Jordan, studying his mindset, his approach to adversity. Jordan had faced pressures far greater than he could imagine, but what made him a legend wasn't just his skill, it was his ability to push through when the odds were against him. The young player wasn't ready to quit. He had come this far, and he wasn't going to let anything hold him back. As the season progressed, his hard work began to show. He earned his spot on the starting lineup, and with each game, his confidence grew. He wasn't just playing for himself anymore, he was playing for the team, for the community that had believed in him, and for the legend who had shown him what it meant to rise above. The true test came when his team faced off against one of the top-ranked programs in the country. The gym was packed, the crowd roaring with excitement. This was the moment, the moment where everything he had worked for would be put to the test. The pressure was immense, but it didn't faze him. He had stood in front of the world once before, under the spotlight of a packed gym, and he had delivered. Now, it was time to prove that he could do it again. The game was close, the tension building with every possession. The young player found himself in the same position he had been in that high school game, taking the final shot, with the game on the line. The crowd fell silent as he dribbled to the top of the key. He could feel the weight of the moment, but instead of freezing, he let it fuel him. He took the shot, just as he had in that gym years ago, his hand steady, his mind clear. Swish! The crowd erupted into cheers. His team had won, and he had proven, once again, that he belonged. But more than that, he had shown himself what he was capable of. He had taken the pressure, the weight of the world on his shoulders, and turned it into something greater. And as he looked up, he knew Jordan would be watching. The legend had believed in him once, and now, he had proven that belief was not misplaced. That night, after the game, as the team celebrated their victory, the young player sat quietly in the locker room, reflecting on the journey. He had come so far from the lonely gym, from the days when no one showed up for him. Now, he was surrounded by teammates who trusted him, a coach who believed in him, and a fan base that was beginning to take notice. It wasn't just about winning the game, it was about understanding the power of persistence, the importance of never giving up, and the realization that every moment, every challenge, had led him here. His future was no longer uncertain. The young player had found his place, not just on the court, but in the world of basketball. And as he walked out of the locker room that night, his heart filled with pride, he knew that this was only the beginning. The journey had only just begun, but now, he understood the true meaning of showing up. And for the first time, he felt ready for whatever came next. After the monumental victory, life for the young player began to change rapidly. What had once been a quiet, isolated existence was now filled with noise, media interviews, phone calls from recruiters, and texts from old friends who were finally acknowledging his talent. His social media was flooded with messages of support and congratulatory comments. It was overwhelming, but in a way that felt exciting. For the first time in his life, the young player felt seen, heard, and, most importantly, validated. The success was a double-edged sword, though. As much as he had longed for recognition, now that it was here, it carried with it a new set of pressures. The college scouts who had previously looked past him were now paying close attention. His coaches were pushing him harder than ever, encouraging him to keep working at a relentless pace. His teammates, once colleagues in struggle, were now looking to him as the cornerstone of their success. The weight of expectation was heavy, and the fear of failure gnawed at him. The young player had always been driven by the love of the game, but now, basketball felt different. It wasn't just about playing anymore, it was about living up to the hype, maintaining the momentum, and making sure that every performance was better than the last. Every move he made on the court felt scrutinized, not just by the fans and coaches, but by himself. The dream of being the next big thing was now a reality, and it wasn't just a blessing, it was a burden. The pressure began to take its toll. During practice, his shots weren't landing as smoothly, his footwork wasn't as sharp, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing the fire that had made him so great in the first place. The fear of disappointing those who now had high expectations of him overshadowed the joy he once felt when he simply played for the love of the game. He had gone from playing freely in an empty gym to competing under the bright lights of fame, and it was starting to feel suffocating. The weight of the world had come to rest on his shoulders, and in those quiet moments, when no one was watching, he found himself questioning if he was truly cut out for the spotlight. Was he really the player they thought he was? Or was he just another kid who had caught a lucky break, someone who would eventually crumble under the weight of those who expected too much? One night, after a particularly rough practice, the young player sat alone in the locker room, his mind racing. He didn't feel the same fire he had felt just months ago when Jordan had filled the stands for him. That game, that moment, had felt like his arrival, but now, it felt like a distant memory. His once unshakable confidence had been replaced with self-doubt. He needed a reminder, something to help him push through the mental block that had formed around him. He needed to reconnect with the reason he had fallen in love with basketball in the first place. As he sat there, his phone buzzed. It was a message from his old coach at the high school where it all started. The message was simple: don't forget where you came from. Remember the fire. Remember the game. The words hit him like a jolt. It wasn't just about the scouts or the pressure from his teammates, it was about the game itself, about rediscovering why he had started playing. He wasn't playing for the media or the fans. He wasn't playing to live up to anyone's expectations. He was playing because basketball had always been a part of him. It was his escape, his passion, his calling. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone but himself. With that realization, the young player stood up, his resolve strengthening. He grabbed his gear, walked out of the locker room, and headed straight for the court. The gym was empty at this late hour, just as it had been in the past when he had practiced alone. But this time, he didn't feel isolated. He felt connected to something bigger, something that had always been with him, even when no one else was watching. On the court, he pushed himself harder than ever before. He wasn't just practicing shots, he was practicing belief. He was reaffirming his trust in his abilities, reminding himself that he had worked too hard to let fear take control. He ran drills, practiced his footwork, and visualized the moments when he had risen to the occasion. He remembered the feeling of the ball leaving his hands in that high school game, the thrill of hitting that game-winning shot, and the rush of having Jordan's belief in him. That moment had changed everything, but now, it was up to him to keep going. The next day, at practice, he showed up with a renewed sense of purpose. His teammates noticed the shift in his energy. He was back, more determined and focused than ever. His shots were falling, his passes crisp, and his defense relentless. But more than that, he had rediscovered his love for the game. The external pressures were still there, but they no longer defined him. What mattered now was the joy of competing, the thrill of improving, and the satisfaction of knowing he had worked for every ounce of success. In the weeks that followed, the young player's performance improved. He regained the confidence he had lost and began playing with a freedom that had been absent. The scouts continued to watch, but now, he was playing for the right reasons. He wasn't trying to impress anyone, he was trying to push himself to be better. The pressure to perform was still present, but it no longer paralyzed him. It became fuel. The pressure of expectations didn't disappear completely. There were still moments of doubt, but the young player now had the tools to manage them. He was no longer just a player who had been recognized for a single moment of brilliance, he was a player who had put in the work, who had earned his place. His journey was no longer defined by the people who filled the stands or the scouts who watched from the sidelines, it was defined by his own belief in himself and his commitment to the game. That realization became even more apparent when the team reached the final game of the season. The championship was on the line, and the stakes had never been higher. But the young player didn't feel the weight of the world pressing down on him. He was ready. He was playing for the game, for the love of basketball that had been there since the very beginning. As the final seconds of the game ticked away, the young player found himself with the ball in his hands once again. The crowd was roaring, the team was waiting, and everything was riding on this moment. But this time, the young player was calm. The pressure wasn't a burden, it was a privilege. He drove to the basket, weaving between defenders, and as the clock ran down, he made the shot. The ball hit the rim, spun, and then dropped through the net. The gym erupted in cheers, and his teammates lifted him into the air. The young player had done it, he had won the game, but more importantly, he had proven to himself that he could handle the pressure, that he could rise above the doubts and expectations. And as he looked up, he saw something that had been absent for so long, the stands were full. The crowd was cheering for him, and he was no longer playing alone. The feeling was unlike any other. He had made it, not because of the recognition, but because he had stayed true to himself, to the game he loved, and to the belief that had been instilled in him long ago. He wasn't just playing for the scouts or the media. He was playing for the love of the game, and that was all that mattered. As the team celebrated their victory, the young player's gaze shifted to the empty space where, just a few months ago, the stands had been bare. He had come full circle. And this time, he wasn't alone. The days following the championship win felt like a blur for the young player. He had always dreamed of this moment, of hitting the game-winning shot, of standing in front of a packed arena, of feeling like he had truly arrived. But the victory, as sweet as it was, brought with it a new set of challenges. He was no longer the underdog, he was now the player everyone was watching. He wasn't just a local hero anymore, he had become a prospect, someone the sports world had started paying attention to. With newfound recognition came the pressure. Media outlets were calling, college scouts were more persistent than ever, and his phone rang constantly with offers for interviews, endorsement deals, and event appearances. It felt like everyone had an opinion about what his next move should be. It was a dream come true for some, but for the young player, it quickly started to feel like a weight that threatened to suffocate him. The sense of self-doubt that had lingered in the back of his mind now began to surface in full force. He wasn't just trying to live up to his teammates' expectations anymore, now he had to meet the expectations of the world. As he sat in his dorm room that evening, after a grueling practice session, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched from every angle. Every time he stepped onto the court, the stakes felt higher. The pressure to perform, to live up to the hype, was overwhelming. He wasn't just playing for the game anymore, he was playing to keep his name in the conversation, to prove that he wasn't a one-hit wonder, that he deserved to be among the best. His teammates noticed the shift. While they had always respected him, now there was a different tone to their interactions. They were all proud of his success, but they could sense that the weight of it was starting to wear on him. The young player found himself retreating more into himself, isolating from his friends and teammates. Every conversation seemed to circle back to his future, to his next move. His coach, too, noticed the change. He'd seen this happen before, how the bright lights could overwhelm a player who wasn't ready for the spotlight. One afternoon, during a team meeting, the coach pulled him aside. "I see the pressure getting to you," the coach said, his voice low but firm. "You're playing great, but there's something off. You've got to remember why you're here, why you play. It's not about the scouts or the media. It's about the game. You've always had this fire, you've got to find it again. Don't lose yourself in all the noise." The words hit harder than the young player expected. He hadn't realized how far he had drifted from his roots, the love of the game. He had been so caught up in the expectations and the constant buzz of being the next big thing that he had forgotten why he started playing basketball in the first place. It wasn't for the media, or the recruiters, or the fans. It was because of the pure joy of playing, of feeling the ball in his hands, of the rhythm of the game. That night, he took a long walk around the campus. The stillness of the night helped him clear his mind. He thought about the small gym where he had first fallen in love with the game, the empty stands, the silence that used to haunt him. It had been in that solitude that he had learned to push himself, to work harder than anyone else. It was where he had first tasted the satisfaction of hard work paying off, even when no one was watching. That fire hadn't gone away, it had just gotten buried under the pressure and the spotlight. The young player knew that to move forward, he needed to reclaim that fire. He couldn't let the weight of expectations define him. He had to focus on what he could control, the game itself. He needed to go back to the basics, to remember why he played and how far he had come, not just to please others, but to satisfy his own need to be the best version of himself. The next day, at practice, the change was evident. The young player was back to his old self, energetic, confident, and focused. He was no longer playing with the weight of the world on his shoulders. He was playing with passion, the kind of passion that had gotten him here in the first place. His teammates noticed the shift immediately. They could see it in the way he moved, in the way he interacted with them. There was a renewed energy in his game, and it was contagious. The team rallied behind him once again, not because of his newfound fame, but because they saw the same player they had always known, the player who played with heart, who loved the game, and who was willing to work for every inch of success. The young player's performance in the next few games reflected this shift. He was no longer trying to prove something to anyone, he was playing for the pure joy of the game. His passes were sharper, his movements more fluid, and his defense relentless. He was once again the player everyone had come to admire, the one who played with intensity, who led by example, and who carried the weight of his team without breaking under pressure. But the real test came during the conference championships, a game that would determine if his team made it to the national tournament. The stakes were higher than ever. The pressure was on, not just from the fans and the media, but from his own expectations. This was the moment he had been working for, the culmination of everything he had dreamed of. As the game tipped off, the young player felt a surge of nerves, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was excitement. He wasn't worried about letting anyone down. He wasn't worried about living up to the hype. He was ready to play. He was ready to lead. The first half of the game was intense. His team was neck and neck with their rivals, and every play felt like it could determine the outcome. The young player found himself in familiar territory, dribbling through defenders, sinking shots, setting up assists. But it wasn't just about the points he was putting up, it was about the leadership he was showing. His team followed his energy, his focus, and they rallied together, knowing that their captain was back to his best. With less than a minute left in the game, the score was tied. The ball found its way into the young player's hands once again, and for a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. He glanced around at his teammates, then looked up at the clock. He knew what he had to do. With a swift movement, he dribbled past his defender and drove to the basket. As he rose for the shot, the world seemed to quiet around him. This was the moment he had prepared for, the moment that could define his career. The ball left his hands, the clock ticking down, and it swished through the net. The gym exploded in cheers. His teammates swarmed him, lifting him into the air. They had won the game. The young player had led them to victory, not through sheer talent alone, but through the belief he had rediscovered in himself. As he stood there, basking in the celebration, he realized something. The pressure would always be there. The expectations, the media, the scouts, they were all part of the game. But what truly mattered was his love for the game, his commitment to his teammates, and the unshakable belief that he could rise to the occasion, no matter how high the stakes. In the end, it wasn't about proving something to anyone else. It was about proving it to himself. And with that, the young player knew he had finally stepped into the role he was meant to play, not just as a basketball player, but as a leader, someone who could carry the weight of the game with pride and joy. The victory at the conference championships had propelled the young player and his team into the national spotlight, and the intensity that followed was something he had never truly anticipated. After that game-winning shot, everything had changed. The spotlight was now on him, the pressure more intense than ever, and the young player couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility growing inside him. This wasn't just about winning games anymore, it was about living up to the expectations of everyone watching, everyone hoping for him to keep this momentum going. The feeling of accomplishment after the win was short-lived. Once the game ended, the floodgates opened. The media, the scouts, the fans, all were now fully focused on him. His phone rang nonstop, reporters lined up for interviews, and his inbox was flooded with messages. College programs wanted him more than ever, hoping to secure a commitment. The offers, both professional and educational, began to stack up quickly. In many ways, the young player's life was a whirlwind. What had been a dream had become a reality, and yet, the weight of it all was beginning to feel suffocating. Every move he made was under a microscope. Every shot in practice, every word he spoke in an interview, it all carried weight. The young player was no longer just another talent, he was now a commodity, a future star whose every decision had consequences. And with it, came an overwhelming sense of self-doubt. Was he ready for this? Was he truly deserving of the hype that had followed him since his championship-winning shot? Back at the university, the young player was met with even higher expectations. His coach, the one who had pushed him to find his fire, was now expecting him to lead the team to greater heights. The coach's words still echoed in his mind, "You've got the talent, but you've got to believe in yourself." In a way, those words were both comforting and terrifying. He had believed in himself once before, but now that belief felt fragile. His performances had been stellar, but he began to wonder if he was only succeeding because of his past moments of brilliance. What would happen if the next game wasn't as good? What would happen if the pressure finally broke him? The reality of being constantly scrutinized had started to wear on him. The young player spent hours in the gym, working on his shooting, his speed, and his agility, but every drill began to feel like another test, one that could be judged and dissected by the outside world. There were moments during practice when he thought about walking away, of stepping out of the spotlight and returning to a simpler life. But each time, the thought would pass, because he knew deep down that he couldn't. This was his dream, one he had fought for, and now that it was here, he couldn't turn back. It was during one of those late-night training sessions when his coach found him, again sitting alone on the sidelines, staring at the court. The team had long left the gym, but the young player had stayed, his mind racing. The coach sat down beside him without saying a word at first. The silence stretched between them, but the young player knew what was coming. "You're burning yourself out," the coach said gently. "You're not going to win the national championship in one night. This isn't about being perfect, it's about playing the game you love. Don't lose sight of that." The young player wanted to speak, to say that the pressure was too much, that he couldn't handle it, but he didn't. Instead, he nodded, forcing a tight smile. He knew what his coach was saying. The coach wasn't just talking about basketball, he was talking about life. The young player had spent so much time trying to be perfect, trying to meet everyone's expectations, that he had forgotten why he started this journey in the first place. It was never about the pressure, it was always about the game, the joy of playing, and the personal growth that came with it. The next day, the young player walked into the gym with a new sense of purpose. He wasn't going to let the pressure control him. He was going to take the advice of his coach and trust in his own abilities. The game was coming up, a high-stakes match against one of the top-ranked teams in the nation. The spotlight was on him once again, but instead of feeling overwhelmed, he embraced it. He understood now that every moment didn't have to be perfect. It was about showing up, working hard, and enjoying the game. On the day of the big game, the arena was packed. The crowd was electric, buzzing with anticipation. The media was everywhere, reporters standing at every corner of the court, their cameras ready to capture the next big story. The young player could feel the weight of the attention pressing in, but he didn't shy away from it. He knew that this was where he belonged, and for the first time in a long while, he wasn't afraid. As the game began, he found himself in a familiar rhythm. His teammates, now fully behind him, played with a new level of confidence. The passes were sharper, the communication clearer. The ball moved fluidly across the court, and the young player's presence was felt at every turn. He wasn't just the one scoring points, he was creating opportunities for others, setting up plays that allowed his teammates to shine. They weren't just relying on him, they were working together as a unit. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The opposing team was fierce, pushing them to their limits, and the young player's fatigue started to show. His shots weren't falling as easily, and the physicality of the game started to take its toll. There were moments when he felt the pressure building again, moments when self-doubt threatened to take over. But in those moments, he remembered his coach's words. He didn't need to be perfect. He just needed to be himself. With only seconds remaining in the game, the score was tied. The gym was filled with noise, but the young player felt strangely calm. He had the ball in his hands once again. He had been here before, in the clutch moments, when everything rested on his shoulders. But this time, he wasn't thinking about the expectations. He wasn't worried about the scouts or the press. He was just playing the game he loved. As the final buzzer sounded, the young player drove past his defender, made his move, and released the ball. It soared through the air in a perfect arc, hitting nothing but net. The gym exploded into cheers as his team celebrated the victory. The young player stood there for a moment, staring at the hoop, realizing that this moment, like the one before it, wasn't about proving himself to anyone else. It was about proving to himself that he could rise to the occasion when it mattered most. As his teammates lifted him into the air, he glanced up at the stands. There was no longer any fear in his heart, just the pure satisfaction of knowing that he had earned this moment. The pressure, once overwhelming, had been transformed into motivation. He had learned to embrace it, to use it to fuel his drive rather than weigh him down. After the game, as the media gathered around, asking questions about his performance, he answered with the same calm confidence. "It wasn't just about the shot," he said. "It was about being part of a team. It was about trusting myself, trusting my teammates, and playing the game the way it was meant to be played." As he walked off the court, he caught a glimpse of the stands, the place where it had all started for him. The gym that once felt empty now seemed full of opportunity, full of growth. The journey had been long, but he had finally found peace with the expectations. He didn't need to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. All he needed to do was keep playing the game he loved. And with that, he knew his story was just beginning. The young player had come a long way from the days of playing in an empty gym. What had started as a quiet, unnoticed talent in a small-town school gym had morphed into something bigger than he ever imagined. He had gone from being the player who felt invisible to the player who embraced the spotlight, from fearing the pressure to owning it. His journey had taken him through doubt, self-discovery, and, most importantly, growth. And now, with the season coming to a close and the national tournament on the horizon, the young player could reflect on everything that had led him here. The game-winning shot against the top-ranked team had solidified his place on the map. He had proven himself to be more than just a flash of brilliance in a single moment. He was a player with the heart and the skills to back up his potential. Yet even with all the success, the young player remained grounded. The lessons he had learned, especially from Michael Jordan's unexpected gesture, had stayed with him. Jordan had shown up for him in a way no one else had, filling the stands to make him feel seen. It had ignited something in him that could never be extinguished, a belief in himself. The national tournament loomed large, and the pressure was heavier than ever. This time, the stakes were higher. Everyone who had followed his journey, from his high school teammates to the college scouts, was waiting to see if he could replicate the same success. The young player knew that the championship was within reach, but he didn't want to get caught up in the expectations. He wanted to play the game, not for the scouts, not for the fans, but for himself. It was about proving to himself that he belonged at this level, that he had earned every ounce of respect he had gained. As the team entered the tournament, the young player's confidence was evident. He wasn't the cocky star, but the calm leader. He led by example, putting the team first and making sure they played together. His game had transformed since the beginning of the season. He was no longer just a scorer, he was a playmaker, a leader, and most importantly, a teammate who knew when to step up and when to step back. The games were intense, with each opponent bringing their own challenge. But as the young player moved through the rounds, he began to feel the familiar rhythm of the game, like he was back in the small gym, back to the basics of why he played. It wasn't just about the scoreboard. It was about the joy of the game, the camaraderie with his teammates, and the satisfaction of knowing that no matter the outcome, he had given everything he had. The championship game was set. The gym was packed, filled with energy that was unlike anything the young player had ever felt. The stands were alive with fans from both teams, cheering for their players. There was no empty space, no silence. This was what he had dreamed of, playing for something bigger than himself, in front of people who appreciated the game, in a game that mattered. But as he stood at the entrance of the court, the young player felt a calm wash over him. This was just another game. It didn't matter that it was for the national title. What mattered was playing the game the way it was meant to be played, with passion, effort, and heart. The first half was a battle. His team fought hard, but the opponents were just as hungry for victory. Every possession was crucial, every decision mattered. The young player's shots were falling, but so were theirs. The game was neck and neck, and the tension built with each passing minute. At halftime, his coach gathered the team. They were up by a slim margin, but no one was getting too comfortable. "This is where the real work begins," the coach said, his voice steady but serious. "You've earned the right to be here, but now you've got to finish it. No distractions, no pressure. Play the game you've been playing all season. Trust each other." The young player could feel the weight of the coach's words. It wasn't about how they started, it was about how they finished. He looked around at his teammates. They were all in it together, and it wasn't just about one person. It was about their collective effort, about playing for each other. The second half was a true test. The other team came out strong, pushing the pace and applying pressure. The young player's resolve was tested. He missed a few shots, something that never happened before, and for a brief moment, doubt crept in. But then, he remembered why he was here. This wasn't the time for fear or hesitation. It was the time to rise above it. He pushed through the mental blocks and started finding his rhythm again. His teammates followed his lead, and they began to click. Every pass was precise, every shot more confident, every play more seamless. As the clock wound down, the game was tied. With just seconds remaining, the ball once again found its way into the young player's hands. This was the moment. His heart raced, but his mind was clear. He wasn't thinking about the crowd, the scouts, or the media. He was thinking about the game, about the work, about the countless hours spent practicing shots in an empty gym. This was his time. He dribbled past his defender, eyes on the basket. His teammates spread out, giving him the space he needed to make the play. The defense collapsed, but it was too late. The young player took the shot, releasing it with perfect form, his body moving instinctively. The ball arced toward the basket, and everything seemed to freeze in place. Swish! The ball went through the net as the buzzer sounded. The gym erupted in cheers, the crowd roaring with excitement. His team ran to him, lifting him up in celebration, but the young player was focused on one thing, the shot. He had done it. He had won the national championship for his team, and in doing so, he had fulfilled his promise to himself. He had faced the pressure, the expectations, and the self-doubt, and he had come out on top. As he looked around, his teammates swarming him, the trophy in his hands, the young player couldn't help but smile. He had come so far, from the empty gym, to the filled stands, to this moment. He remembered the feeling of playing alone, of no one showing up for him, and now, he was here, at the pinnacle of his journey. He wasn't just a player who had won a game, he was a player who had grown, who had learned to trust in himself, and who had found his place in the world. Later that evening, as he stood alone in the locker room, the championship trophy beside him, he thought back to that night when Michael Jordan had filled the stands for him. Jordan had believed in him, had shown up when no one else did. And now, the young player realized that it wasn't just about proving his worth to others. It was about proving it to himself. His journey wasn't over. This victory was just one chapter in a much larger story. But the lessons he had learned, the fire he had rediscovered, would stay with him forever. As the young player left the locker room, surrounded by the cheers of his teammates and the celebrations of the night, he knew that no matter where his career took him, he had already won the most important battle, the battle within himself. He wasn't just playing for the championship anymore. He was playing for the love of the game, for the pure joy that had first brought him to the court. And that, he knew, was the legacy he would leave behind.